First of all, welcome, welcome. This is great. What a great group of people. This is awesome. So let me get a little bit of, set the stage here, a little bit of history as to why we're here, what prompted this we want to call it event, chat, conversation. So I got to go back about 5-6 years ago where our team decided to do what we called the Sachse Speaker Series. And we started out years ago and we had a man named Mark Owen, who some of you may have heard his name before. He was part of SEAL Team 6, who was one of the SEAL Team members who went and killed Osama bin Laden. And we brought him in and he spoke and we had a series, spoke to many people and community people, and it was really spectacular. Then I think a year or two later, we had Andy Fastow. Andy Fastow was part of the series. He was the CFO of Enron. He went to prison, and then he was in a speaker series talking about his experience of, what he learned from that experience and so on and so forth. We thought it was very interesting. And then this weird thing came, COVID happened, and we said, you know what, I don't think you're gonna be able to assemble people. So nothing really went on for many, many years. And our team talked about when is the right time, when can we get things going and do something else, right? So then fast forward to September of 2023. Karen and I were lucky enough to go on, I'll call it a mission trip to the UAE and to Israel, which really was centered around the Abraham Accords. And we went to the UAE and we went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. This fine esteemed gentleman here, Omar Al Busaidy, I always get it right. Omar Al Busaidy was our resident scholar. What does that mean? He's going to talk about that in a minute. But he's an author, he's a scholar, he's a diplomat. He worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs, the consulate in New York. So his resume is in your program there if you want to read his bio. I'm not going to do the typical thing and read the bio. He wouldn't let me do that. He said he doesn't like when people do that. So you got it there. You can read it on your own. And by the way, it was 2.5 pages because there's so much of it, but we had to shorten it to that. So that's what it is. So that's where we met Omar. And when we were there, I'll just say it perfectly bluntly, I fell in love with him, okay? We just hit it off. I was so fascinated by not just Omar and him and his knowledge, his experience, and where he came from, but what was going on in the UAE and how it relates to everything from the UAE itself, the Abraham Accords. How does Detroit and Michigan, particularly Detroit, learn from what Dubai and UAE has done over the last 53 years? And have some of the interesting conversations. Well then, fast forward, October 7th happened. So then we said, okay, you know what? Now we really have to bring Omar in because now this topic of what's going on in the world becomes even more relevant and the challenges. So we're going to tie it all together. So that's why we're here. That's kind of how the whole thing come about. The agenda is pretty simple. Omar's going to chat in a minute. I'm going to let him talk in a minute, I promise, and then I'm going to do all the talking. Okay, I want to set the stage. He's going to share some stuff. I'll let him set that up himself. I got a whole bunch of questions. We could sit here for 10 hours, and I got enough questions for 10 hours. That will not be very interesting to you. So we're going to cut it off as soon as I get through a few of them. We really want this to be a fireside chat. We really want people to ask questions and participate. And I'll let Omar will tell you where the line is of what questions you can ask and not ask. So I'll pass it on. So please welcome my near and dear friend, Omar.
Thank you, everyone. In our culture, we say salam alaikum or shalom alaikum as well. And thank you so much for having me. Todd has been an amazing host. He's not just a friend, he's honestly a brother. We had a great time in the UAE, and I'm glad that this is my first time here in Detroit. So I know you've probably read my bio, but just a very quick introduction about myself. Omar Al Busaidy. I am from the United Arab Emirates, born and bred in Dubai. I did my undergrad in marketing at the American University in Dubai. I actually got my degree from Colin Powell, the late Colin Powell. Fast forward 2019, I'm honored that I received the Fulbright Scholarship from the State Department. Came here, went to Florida State, met my beautiful wife, Hannah, who's sitting here in the front. And after graduating, I had the opportunity to get recruited at the UAE consulate in New York. So sometimes I like to explain this. You know, most countries have embassies, which are usually in the capital, and the consulates are in the commercial capitals. And New York happens to be the commercial capital here in the US. So I was a commercial attaché. But during my time at the consulate, I also had the opportunity to work on one of the most important agreements that the UAE had signed and announced in 2020. So it was still during the peak of COVID, which was known as the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords is basically the agreement that the UAE, Bahrain as well, facilitated by the US to normalize their relationship with Israel. So basically to have diplomatic ties. Because up until 2020, there weren't diplomatic ties with Israel for a lot of reasons that we're probably going to get into later. So because I have the behind the scene information, I can disclose it now, and I'll be happy to discuss that in the conversation. So that's just a very quick rundown about myself. And I think, of course, as Todd mentioned, I think this conversation happening right now, especially after October 7, is vital to try to explain to people that, you know what, despite whatever you see on the news, there is still hope. As long as countries like the United Arab Emirates exist, for not being biased, I think even other people might say this too. We've always been the beacon of hope. There was a group of people from Detroit that came and visited the UAE, and they saw this for themselves. You could probably even ask the delegation that did come to the UAE. So thank you again for having me, and I'll let Todd start off with the questions.
Well, so I think it'd be really good to spend a minute or two and kind of give a high level of how the UAE is structured.
Sure.
The Emirates and the 7 Emirates and how that works, because I think that helps give context to the conversation as we move through the various topics, to know where it's coming from, because we had a lot of conversations say, you know, you're not an American, you're an Emirati.
Yeah.
All your vantage point comes from the culture, the governance, the policies of the UAE.
True.
And Americans, I bet you, I don't know, I'm not gonna embarrass you, but I can tell you before I came there, I didn't know it, I didn't understand it, and I think it's really good to kind of give a little high level.
Perfect.
So if you could do that'd be great.
So going back, okay, so we say the UAE. UAE stands for United Arab Emirates. Just like how you have the United States of America, we don't have 50 states, we are 7 Emirates. A lot of the time people hear Dubai, and Dubai's been great at PR, which probably like Detroit needs that too. But Dubai, and because they've been promoting it so well, and everybody knows Dubai has the tallest building in the world, the Palm Island, you know, people like Will Smith, Drake, all these other celebrities, including Eminem, who's a Detroitian who's been to Dubai too, come to visit. But it's not a country, it's a city or an emirate of the United Arab Emirates. We are located as what's known as the Arabian Gulf. Sometimes I have this debate with my Iranian friends, and they say it's the Persian Gulf. We like to say the Arabian Gulf. The Arabian Gulf is surrounded by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, and Yemen. So that makes the Arabian Gulf. It's then attached to Israel, Jordan, Palestine, I guess, or Palestinian territories, Lebanon, Syria, and then it connects to the North African countries, which we know as Egypt, Morocco, Mauritania, Libya, Tunisia. So this is where we stand. There are 3 types, I like to break it down, of the Arab world. The Arab world is segregated with the MENA region, the North African region, then the Levant, and then the GCC, which I know Todd has a question on the GCC as well. So just to give you a context of where we exist, and by the way, the connectivity between the US and the UAE is insane. Like there are 14 daily flights to 14 different cities between the UAE and the US. So there's direct flights from Chicago, Boston, New York, etc. We can go on forever. So that's where we stand. Now,
talk about the government and how the 7 sheikhs and how that works, and then we can get into some stuff that'll really
So the UAE, we are, sometimes people ask me, so are you guys a kingdom? Are you a dictatorship? Are you whatever? So I like to explain it like this. Our principality, it's like a monarchy. So we're not the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They have a king. We have what's known as sheikhs. So we are a sheikhdom. So each emirate has the ruler. So we have 7 emirates, and each emirate has the ruler, and they're known as like sheikhs. But the president of the UAE always comes from Abu Dhabi. The vice president comes from Dubai. So the president right now is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. The UAE was formed just over 50 years ago, back in 1971. So we are relatively a new country that's managed to position itself globally as a major powerhouse for economic progress and stability. We don't have general elections like you have over here. I know very soon, coming up in November. But the ruler or the president is elected by the Supreme Council of the 7 Emirates, which is the rulers of the 7 Emirates, who decide who would be president and vice president.
So I like to put it, to simplify, it's a board of directors. There's 7 board of directors, and there's a chairman of the board.
Exactly.
Right? To simplify it, and the sheikh from Abu Dhabi is the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
And the other 6
Exactly.
are the board members.
Exactly.
And pretty much every decision across the whole country really resides with those 7 people, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of like a board. Okay, so that kind of just sets the tone. I think that's a good say. So I just want to kind of dive into some questions. We're going to kind of say high level and talk about what's going on in governance and policy making that goes on there. So another stat, which I'll just throw out there, is that there's about 10 million people that live in the UAE.
Yes.
1 million of them are Emirati, 9 million are expats. Okay, so obviously you're an Emirati, you're a super minority. You're 10% of the population, right? So my question then is that, how does the UAE manage the diverse, expat population in terms of political inclusion, representation? What is the difference between an Emirati and an expat that's living there as far as whatever?
Yeah. So for the UAE, our major source of income for the longest time has obviously been oil. Everybody thinks most Emiratis, these 1 million people, have like a gas station in the backyard, which is not true, by the way.
They have a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, and
no,
a
it's
Porsche.
not true. We don't all drive Lamborghinis. There are a lot of Lamborghinis and Ferraris, but that's not all Emiratis.
Most of them.
We do have a lot of Russians that have moved to the UAE too, and they happen to be driving a lot of those Ferraris and Lamborghinis, as they do in many other places. So yes, we are 1 million people, and the 9 million come from 200 nationalities, different religious backgrounds and ethnicities. And the way that the government has managed to do this is, yes, they've catered certain areas of the city where it's predominantly mostly Emiratis. Now, Emiratis, just to give you some context, the government provides a lot of incentives to them. We have a very good social welfare program, free education, free healthcare. Obviously, we have 0 income tax. We don't have property tax, none of that. And when we get married, for example, we're given a choice: either you get a free plot of land or you can choose to get a house. And so, of course, when the population is very small like that, they can be generous with their offerings. So this is how the government manages the relationship with its people. We also have access to meet the rulers of each of these emirates. There's an app, we register online, and we can go and meet with our ruler or even with the president at least once every 2 months, which is an awesome opportunity. So the relationship between the leadership of the UAE and its people is very, very tight-knit.
But I want to kind of get back to the difference between an Emirati and an expat.
Yes.
So can an expat go meet with a thing? Is an expat, does the laws or rules different
Yeah.
as far as whether you're an expat or an
Yeah.
Emirati?
Yeah.
So how does that work? How are they treated differently?
So-
Obviously, there's no voting.
True.
So that doesn't apply. But what about everything else?
Yeah, so the expats do have an opportunity to meet with the president or the vice president, etc. But the ones that do meet are usually people who've like achieved something. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a millionaire or a billionaire. Innovators, academics, people who are achieving something have an opportunity to get to meet with the sheikh, and we see this all the time. But it's not as accessible as the way it is for Emiratis, which is like by default. Whichever level of Emirati, they usually have that access to the government. Now, one of the things I probably never mentioned this to you before, Todd. Yes, you have all these people who come from around the world, but when an entity wants to employ people from certain nationalities, the government, to try to manage and balance the number of people from different parts of the world, they even set quotas. Because sometimes there could be one nationality that might desperately want to come and move to the UAE, and they don't want to overwhelm the country with like one nationality over another necessarily. I mean, predominantly the biggest concentration of nationalities in the UAE are South Asians. So India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, they make up a majority of the population. I mean, I think we have around 2.5 to 3 million Indian and Pakistanis in the UAE, and you see them everywhere. And then it's mixed with like, you have Arabs, and then the countries like from Europe, and then of course Americas. So the government tries to balance this through a quota system. These people, when they come to the UAE, anyone who's employed in the UAE has to be provided with health insurance. So everybody has health insurance in the UAE by default. They are people majority who actually come from for unskilled labor. So we say unskilled labor are the people or blue collar workers working in construction sites, etc.
Those are skilled labor.
The skilled labor, sorry. Skilled labor who work in the, sorry.
That's highly skilled.
Highly
labor,
skilled,
by the
sorry.
way.
But sorry, I got it the other way around. Blue collar workers or skilled labor, they're the ones who would, they usually don't get paid as much as what I heard people get paid here working in construction, nowhere near.
That's why construction's so expensive here.
Exactly.
Sorry.
So these guys get provided accommodation, transportation, and meals, including insurance. But of course, their salaries aren't as high as what I heard here in the US.
Right. So let's just jump for a minute. We talked a little bit about that. So let's talk about the oil. Everyone's curious about the oil.
Yeah.
So when we were in the UAE, you shared some of this. How much oil does the UAE produce?
So right now,
Barrels or in dollars?
Okay, so barrels, the UAE produces between 4 to 4.3 million barrels of oil a day. And they expect to produce up to 5 million before 2026.
Okay, so just stay there for a minute, okay? What's oil go for a barrel right now? 90? 80? 70? What's that right? Well, who knows what oil's at today? $80 a gallon, or a barrel, okay?
Yeah.
So how much does it cost the UAE to produce a barrel of oil?
Between $1 to $3.
Okay. All right, everyone can go home now. That's all you wanted to hear, right? So if you do the math, it's pretty spectacular. You know, it's called $300 to $400 million
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah.
Okay. But by the way, there's only days that end in the letter Y, okay, that they make. So my question is, no seriously, but this is important. How is that money managed? Who controls that money?
Yeah.
Right? How is it distributed? You know, so if you
Yeah.
kind of give a high level of that, because okay, you got all these billions, trillions of dollars are coming in. Okay, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
How is it distributed
Sure.
amongst the Emirates and all that kind of stuff? Because
So-
that's an interesting story.
Sure. So number one, Abu Dhabi, just to give you some context, Abu Dhabi has 80% of the land mass of the United Arab Emirates. 90% of the oil exists in Abu Dhabi. So the government of Abu Dhabi and the leadership there, which is where the president comes from, they distribute the revenue to the other Emirates And there's a certain distribution that they do. I'm not exactly sure about the calculation or like what percentage exactly. So back in the 90s, oil contributed to like between 80 to 90% of the economy. Now it's the complete opposite. So it's only like 20% of the UAE's GDP it comes from oil. The rest of it is from trade, tourism. In fact, we are between the second and the third largest trading hub in the world, especially when it comes to not just export, but re-export hub. So everything that comes like from China, from the east, stops in the UAE and then continues to the west or to Africa or to other places. So we have one of the largest trading hubs. So that's how oil is distributed.
Okay, that was the fun stuff.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to get some of their stuff that's more interesting, all right? So a lot of conversation about human rights and stuff like that. So I read, because some of you may have done some homework, we can talk about this all day long. I did a couple little research here. So I read the World Report that they call the Human Rights Watch, that men can unilaterally divorce their wives, whereas women must apply for a court order to obtain a divorce. True or false?
False. So it used to be that way, but it's changed. A lot of the laws have changed in the last 4 or 5 years, and women can go and ask for a divorce just like a man can.
Okay. So I also read, actually recently in June, the government pressured Amazon to restrict items and search related to LGBT people, symbols, and issues in its website at the UAE. So number one, is that true?
It is true.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
So how does a gay person in UAE kind of go about their lives? I'm sure there's gay people in the UAE, whether it be expats or Emiratis.
Yeah.
So share, because as an American thing, that's a sensitive topic.
Yeah. So yes, there are members of the LGBTQ community that live in the UAE. You can notice or you see, and I have friends that are gay and they live there. The thing is, the way that the country just wants to manage the let's say the traditions and the values of the way the UAE was founded. Of course, in the end, it is also an Islamic country. They just don't want the promotion of so for example, June is, I guess, Pride Month, right? They don't allow people to publicly go and take the flag or to go and organize marches on the streets. So yes, they allow you, but they just say, whatever you fancy behind closed doors, just keep it behind closed doors. People don't need to know, if you're a man, do you like a woman or a man? Or for a woman, if you like a woman or a man.
So
keep it to your...
It's the old U.S. Army, don't ask, don't tell.
Yes, I guess you can use that.
That's kind of, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so there's also, and you and I talked about this too, kind of the freedom of speech. We had actually today at lunch, we were talking extensively about the freedom of speech. That, in America, we treasure the freedom of speech.
Yeah.
You can stand on the corner and we can say, against the government or against any other ethnic group or so on and so forth, because your freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Right? Which doesn't exist in the UAE. So how do you play on that? How do us Americans kind of understand that? Because that's like the core of our existence.
So, when it comes to freedom of speech, and I like to always have this debate, they don't say you don't have a freedom of speech. Anybody can say whatever they want. For example, if you don't agree with this leader or whoever, they just don't want you to go out and make a public statement. If you're saying it behind closed doors at home, you can say whatever you want. They don't have bugs inside the apartments or in your homes to see whether you dislike or whether you agree or disagree with the government or the leadership or the country or whatever. There's very clear laws. You can't insult any religious symbol first, definitely not Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism, none of that publicly. You can't insult the country's leadership. That's definitely not allowed, whether it's online or offline, as long as you live there. Because in the end of the day, for them, if you don't like their policies or you don't like the way things are or whatever, they just say, look, then maybe if it's better back home, then you can go there. Nobody's forced you to come and move to the UAE, and they're doing their best in the way that they govern the country, but this is it. So why do they do that? For them, nothing matters the most as much as peace and prosperity. For them, the stability that they have when running the country and the day-to-day issues or whatever, or errands of the state, they want to make sure that it's not disrupted by this. So one example I like to say, during the Arab Spring, when there was for example, let's take Syria. The Syrians living in the UAE went out and started to protest at the Syrian embassy. That crowd was dispersed in like less than 10 minutes. The government, and a lot of them got deported back to Syria, because if you have a problem, if you're in Syria, fine, you can protest there if those rules allow you to do that. But they don't want you to be blocking the streets in the UAE because you don't agree with your government or whatever. Because in the end of the day, for us, especially, we have some diplomats in the room too, there's diplomatic relations and they're maintained for certain reasons. Just because we have diplomatic relations doesn't mean you love them. In diplomacy, it's all about interests. There are no friends, regardless with any country. So people need to understand that. And of course, the normal individual, they mostly react on impulse or emotions. But you have to understand from a governance perspective, you can't disrupt what they've been working on. Again, we're not hundreds of years old like the US, 400 or 500 years old. We're only 50 years old, and we're just starting. For us, this is our gold rush now. So if you have people who come from different parts of the world, and we have people, like I said, you have 200 nationalities. So we have Ukrainians and Russians and Indians and Pakistanis. All the people that come and live in the UAE come from places where they've already have so much hardship in their countries. If you have 200 nationalities disrupting or protesting on the streets, we'll never have any kind of progress. Like, we're going to just have protest after protest.
Right. So we've talked about this, and so you shared when we were there, and we've talked about it a lot, about all the ministry of tolerance and ministry of this and ministry of that. So kind of how is that managed, and what's the message? And you also, and I think it'd be kind of cool to tell your story that you told last night about your driving incident. I think that would be interesting. But
sure.
But there's just, I know it's kind of a different context about behavior. And what I've kind of learned from Omar is that, and this may sound crazy, I look around the room here, and I'm not advocating anything, so please don't take any of my comments that all of a sudden I want to turn America into the UAE. But it's very interesting. What you're not allowed to do in the UAE, if I look around this room, I don't think anybody in this room on a daily basis or on the monthly basis or yearly basis or your lifetime does any of the things that you're not allowed to do in the UAE. Okay? So it's actually a really interesting concept. But I say that to some degree as far as, some people may have marched in protests about certain things or civil rights or so on and so forth. But as far as breaking laws or going on social media and saying crazy, stupid things, which some people do. So I guess my question along that is, how does the government kind of maintain that? What are they doing every day? Because when we were there, first of all, the place is immaculate. Everything is perfectly clean. There's no theft. There's no crime. It's kind of cool, but it's also a little creepy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he said that I didn't see any homeless people. So right, yeah. How do we do it? If we go back again, so the man that's credited with a lot of the progress that the UAE has made so far is someone called Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. So he is the UAE Vice President, Prime Minister, and ruler of Dubai. He is also known as like the Sheikh CEO. And one of the things that he said when he was interviewed once by CNN, like, how did you manage to create this ecosystem of progress and stability? And he said, I did two things. I invested in infrastructure. So that's why when you come there, you'll see some of the best roads, bridges in the world. and thanks to companies like Parsons and stuff from the US, and security. Like our security, especially like the police officer, when the police officer just joins the force, their salaries start at like $10,000 a month. This is no tax. So when you pay your security and your government officials well, you're not going to have corruption. So because we don't have corruption, because there's a constant communication and follow-up to see how do they upheld the laws of the country and manage the peace and security in the country. This is why we managed to control everything that we've managed to achieve so far, and this is why people continue to move to the UAE.
Okay, let's jump to the Abraham Accords. So why don't you give a little bit of background before I ask some questions about your involvement in the Abraham Accords, how the history, because you talked a lot about it when we were in the UAE, about how it kind of was happening, and then it just happened.
So, like I said, since from the get-go, it's been a melting pot of different nationalities that lived in the country, right? What's crazy is, so just like anything else, you have usually like a Ministry of Health or your Ministry of Transportation, etc. In 2016, the government announced an interesting ministry called the Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence, and we were like, what are they talking about? Why do you have to have a Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence? Because actually before that, we had Ministry of Happiness. And actually people said, you know what, we do need to have a Ministry of Happiness because we're being overworked, and maybe this ministry might be able to do something about our mental health programs or something like that. Because literally like people work, I don't know, like 60, 80 hours. I work infinite hours a day, when I'm back in Dubai. So it's nice to be back here. But when they established Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence, for me, I immediately knew this was definitely going to be something to do with Israel. And very shortly after that, you started to see Israeli athletes, particularly like in combat sports like judo, jiu-jitsu, and then other sports, started to come to the UAE. And then also they started playing the Israeli national anthem as well. Then you started seeing Israeli ministers coming to visit. Even the Minister of Culture went and visited the famous Sheikh Zayed Mosque in Abu Dhabi. So you're like, okay, all this is happening, and we don't have an Israeli embassy here, or we don't have a UAE embassy in Israel. And then fast forward, out of nowhere, for a lot of people it shocked them, 2020, standing there in the White House lawn, you see Trump and the foreign ministers of UAE and Bahrain and Israel, the Prime Minister, signed the Abraham Accords. So it did shock a lot of people. But so from my background, as I said, I worked at the consulate. The Emiratis, a lot of people because I used to work in government, we always knew that we had a relationship with Israel. There were always official delegations before all these athletes started to come in to the UAE and making it public. We knew that there was cooperation between the two countries because the UAE always knew, in the end of the day, Israel has a lot of technology and innovation that we can benefit from, and there's also things that they can benefit from us in the UAE too. In fact, the relationship has probably been going on for over 20 years. So we didn't normalize trade with or ties with Israel, we formalized it. That's why I like to coin it. And
well, I remember you had said when we were there that when it was announced, it was not a surprise in the UAE. That was an interesting thing. That was not a surprise.
Yeah.
When we left UAE, we went to Israel. When we were in UAE, we met with the Israeli ambassador to UAE. When we went to Israel, we met with the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And we met, obviously, with many people from Israel. It was a shock to the people in Israel.
Yeah.
It was a shock to the people in America.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was not a shock to the people in the UAE because you say they were already kind of preparing the government for that. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. So that when it was formally announced, so when they did that Ministry of Tolerance, that was kind of foreshadowing to get the people comfortable with that.
Exactly. And also the reason is because when they announced the Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence, we also could see Emirati authors or writers writing op-eds in Israeli newspapers like Times of Israel or Haaretz and whatever. So you're like, wait, how does this happen? Because it never used to happen before. So that started to take place, and also vice versa. You start to see that too. So maybe some of the people did not understand. Maybe they saw someone's name and they thought this is like another, like someone called Muhammad something, and they thought he's Israeli or, So they didn't know that this person was from the UAE.
Okay, so now how has the fact that the UAE has signed this accord with Israel, how has it affected its relationship and its relations with other Gulf countries and other Arab countries, whether it be Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, so on and so forth. There's only two countries at the time that signed. Initially, it was only the two countries. Okay. So how did that affect your relationships with other Arab countries?
And also, Todd, before I explain how does it affect, I also want to explain like why they even signed it to begin with.
Okay.
Look, the explanation from the UAE government on why they signed is you have a state that's there and it's not going anywhere. You cannot ignore like your neighbor. Like we disagree with Iran on a lot of things. In fact, for example, with Iran, Iran has 3 islands that they've occupied that belong to the UAE, and every year the UAE, during the UN General Assembly, we mention that we want to retrieve these islands back. But so yes, we disagree with them on this, and they're occupying the islands, but we still trade with them. The trade between Iran and the UAE is north of 20 billion a year. So you can disagree with people, but you can still work with them. It's the same as with your neighbor. You may not like your neighbor, but you're going to have to interact with them at some time or another. So this, I just want to explain why we did that. This is number one. How did it affect our relationship with other countries? Of course, first, there were countries like Iran. There was against it. They made a statement. The Palestinian Authority also made a statement. That they said that they backstabbed us. In fact, the Palestinian Authority, they called for an emergency meeting with the Arab League. And when they did that, the Arab League secretary came out and said, you know what? We respect the UAE's decision for whoever they want to have a diplomatic relationship with. Even Saudi Arabia and other countries followed through. So none of the other countries did that except the Palestinian Authority. Right. So, and the other thing that they did is they withdrew their ambassador from the UAE too.
Right, okay. So I know we got a few more things I want to set the stage for. So what is the sentiment of Emiratis, okay? When you hear Hamas, the Hamas war, what's going on? How does, I'm talking about UAE, whether it be the government or the average Emirati, view the Hamas-Israel war, and how do they define that?
Yeah. So before October 7th, before all this, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Muslim Brotherhood, they've always been listed as terrorist organizations in the UAE, including Al-Qaeda. They were all terrorist organizations.
Palestinian Authority too?
The Palestinian Authority, no. They're not a terrorist organization. So these were entities that were established, or they were labeled by the UAE as terrorist organizations. So this conflict now is something that the UAE government has always communicated that they expect some kind of disruption that will come from an entity that they recognize are terrorist organizations. And you continue to see even Hezbollah every once in a while throwing rockets out at Israel. So the Emirati people, as I said earlier, we meet with our leadership all the time. They've seen with everything that we've achieved as a country has been a complete success. This is why they believe that even the government's stance is right when it comes to this. The UAE is the only country, only Arab country that made a statement against Hamas when October 7 took place. But at the same time, they call out Israel for its actions. And you see that all the time. Regardless of the situation that's taking place, the UAE continues to send aid to people in Gaza. They build field hospitals and send food aid to the people there as much as they can. And because we have our relationship with Israel, we were able to use that relationship to get them to vet our products to get the aid to the people in Gaza.
Okay, we can talk about that all day. We're going to leave that. We're going to leave a lot of those topics to you because I got pages of more questions. But we got to hit the last topic quickly. Okay.
Sure.
So just to set context, so Omar came in town on Sunday. We hung out at our house, and then yesterday we came downtown, and we were at our office for a while. Then we went on a Bedrock, hosted a tour, and we did a downtown walking tour with Bedrock, so we can kind of see what's going on in downtown. Kind of gave some high level of that. He saw I'll call it the good and the beautiful, what was going on there. So I said, okay, now when we leave downtown, before we go home, we're going to drive up Woodward, and we're going to go right up Woodward. So now you can see downtown. We went to Midtown, and then we went to New Center, and all of a sudden, things change, okay? And you get into this next part of Detroit, which is a little bit tougher, and through Highland Park, and all of a sudden, as we got to 8 Mile, he took out his phone and says, I got to take a picture which says 8 Mile, because that's what you know about Detroit, is 8 Mile. And you go over the bridge, and all of a sudden it says, welcome to Ferndale, and there's beautiful new car dealerships, and blah, 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 and it completely transforms, okay? So I just want to give you context of what, in the 48 hours that Omar and Hannah have been here, kind of what they've seen in the context. So my question to you is, what'd you see? What was your reaction to seeing Detroit coming from, now you've been all over he's traveled all over the world, he's traveled all over America, he's been in more places than, anybody I know, but you've never been to Detroit.
So my first reaction, honestly, like there's two things that I love a lot about Detroit so far. The people are amazing, and the city is beautiful too. What I feel like, I described Detroit. There's a fruit from Thailand called mangosteen. I don't know if you guys ever tried mangosteen before. It's from Thailand or the Philippines. It looks a bit rough from the outside, but it's beautiful and tasty on the inside. And this is what I saw. All these buildings that, when you look outside, it looks a little bit maybe like rough, but when you go inside, everything looks beautiful and the aesthetics. And we went to places like Birmingham. I thought it was amazing. So for 6.5 years, I previously used to work at the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi. And I described Detroit like Abu Dhabi and Chicago like Dubai. So when we worked there, we had to always kind of like come up with strategies and ideas of how can we promote Abu Dhabi to the world, what could be our USP or unique selling proposition or unique selling point. And that's what I feel Detroit needs to work on, its USP, to try to promote it to people in the UAE and around the world, because I feel like you guys have a lot to offer, but maybe because of the past or the trauma that took place, I feel like you need to come out of it stronger and make a bolder statement. And like I said in the very beginning, hire maybe the same PR agency that promoted Dubai to begin with, and maybe that might help you shine a little bit more and attract more businesses, people to move back to Detroit.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. I just want to set the stage. I got many, many more. So I'm going to throw it out to the audience here on any topic that we talked about. And what's the criteria for questions?
You can ask me whatever you want. No strings attached. Don't hold back. I'm ready for the tough ones. Like, you want to grill me or roast me? Think about this like the Tom Brady roast. It can be as bad as that or as good as that, whatever you want. But I'm happy to answer any question. There's one here. Oh,
Wait, we got a microphone.
Yeah.
There's a mic. Sleek!
Sleek, what's going on?
Sleek!
Maybe I missed it. I was 5 minutes late. What is the tax structure, and how does the whole taxation work in your country?
So I said it earlier. We don't have like income tax. Yeah, there's no income tax. There's no property tax. What we do have is like the sales tax, the VAT, which is 5%. And recently we introduced a 9% corporate tax, but it's on profit. And the reason why we even introduced both the VAT or the sales tax and the corporate tax is because the UAE and the GCC countries, the Gulf countries, were pressured by the World Bank, IMF, and the OECD because they felt that the UAE was providing unfair advantage to the global economic community. And a lot of companies were moving their headquarters to the UAE and they didn't want them to use it as a tax haven. So this is the reason why we introduced it. Otherwise, the government didn't have any need to.
Because they didn't need to.
They didn't need to.
They had plenty of money. there was a bunch of questions back there. I think, John?
Omar, welcome.
Thank you.
Todd, thank you. I'd like to understand a little bit more about, staying consistent with the Tom Brady roast, a little bit more about the bromance that's occurred between, no. I would like to ask just generally about the sheikhs in general. Do you think they're aligned? If not, what are the issues between them, and what are the issues that it causes if they're not aligned?
Sure. It's a great question. You know, it's like when I went to Sachse Construction, they have their 4 pillars, then they have their 10 principles and everything, right? So we have our own charter, and I want to emphasize again, economic prosperity, peace, and security are the main pillars for the UAE's vision. Any leader or any of the rulers that come to power are ensure that they're trained to uphold those values for generations to come. We previously, now I mentioned the UAE had, the founder of the UAE was a man called Sheikh Zayed, who's known as the father of the UAE or founder of the UAE. Before him, it was his older brother. His name was Sheikh Bout. Now Sheikh Bout, he was a good man, but unfortunately, he wasn't very visionary, and he didn't want to kind of like share the oil wealth. And because he lacked that sense of like generosity and everything else, the people decided that they didn't want to have him lead anymore, and that's why he was replaced by his younger brother. Now, one more thing I want to mention is, yes, we don't have elections now, but previously, the way that each ruler of every emirate was elected to be even a ruler is because us Arabs, we are tribal. So my name, as you can see, is Omar Al Busaidy. So I come from the Al Busaidy tribe. Every tribe has a leader, which is also a sheikh. So there's a sheikh of an Al Busaidy tribe. These tribes are the ones that decide which one amongst them will be the tribe that will lead them forward. So the Al Nahyan family in Abu Dhabi, they were always known to be the ones who were the peacemakers. They were wise, they were understanding, they had very good relationships with, but they weren't even wealthy. It was the merchants, the wealthier people who decided that, look, we know what, we want this person to be our leader. And these guys now became wealthy, and now they're kind of like paying back their gratitude for being elected to become this place. And fortunately, we're blessed that till today they continue, like from father to son to brother, they've become amazing, and the trajectory is still like a hockey stick.
Right, so far so good.
Yeah.
As they say, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, hang on, we got a microphone over here.
Good question.
All the way
we have
up.
to get this on.
The question was, are there any churches or synagogues?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we do have churches and synagogues. Like even with churches, you have Catholic churches, you have Protestant, you have all these different denominations. In fact, one amazing project that Todd and we managed to visit is called the Abrahamic Family House. So it's a mosque, a church, and a synagogue, and they're all designed and built in the same dimensions, same height, and in the middle, there's a cultural center which organizes a lot of events which are very similar or maybe different sometimes amongst the different faiths. So yeah, we have this beautiful project which you should come and see in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, the 3 buildings are, one's more gorgeous than the other. Architecture, they're spectacular. And as you said, they're the exact same dimensions, same height, same width, same depth. Literally, they're all different. There's only one thing wrong with them, is that we didn't build them. Other than that, they're spectacular.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. In Dubai, there's no synagogue yet. The government had donated land to the Jewish community, but there are 4 rabbis in Dubai, and they can't make up who's going to be leading the construction of this one synagogue in Dubai. So there are around 20,000 Jews now, 20 to 30,000 Jews that live in the UAE, and have 5 rabbis. The only reason the rabbi managed to make it work in Abu Dhabi is because he's the rabbi of the Chabad in Abu Dhabi, and that's why it works. But in Dubai, they don't have that Chabad rabbi, and they're still disputing on who's going to be the rabbi of Dubai.
Yeah, because if you have 4 Jews, you have 7 opinions. Right. Okay, got it. There's a microphone over there.
Hi. What do you think of the prospects of peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel?
Beautiful. Todd just like smiled. He's like, thank God someone asked that question.
It's
So-
in here. I got 20 more questions.
So guys, if you remember what I said about how the Abraham came to fruition, the way the UAE did it, we feel was smart, it was discreet, and the partners that they worked with in the region, including with the US, was great. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia, it was people heard that the next countries that were going to sign the accords was going to be Saudi Arabia, and the next one was going to be Indonesia as well, which has the largest Muslim population in the world. Then things obviously stalled because there was a new administration and everything went haywire. With this administration, they were making a lot of announcements and statements that Saudi Arabia intends to normalize ties with Israel. And every time the State Department spokesperson would go on stage and say this, the Saudi foreign ministers or Saudi spokespeople would go and say, no, this is not true. And they say that because in the end of the day, they do not want to have their population revolt. However, during a conversation with CBS with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he said, yes, we do want to have these ties, but we're going to find the right time to do so. And the reason why he said it that way is because he didn't want this US administration now to continue to make it so public, because this is such a sensitive topic that it might derail the whole discussions. And unfortunately, because this took place, October 7 happened, because I think the build-up to those normalization was going to happen very soon, and October 7 happened, Hezbollah started to attack, Iran started to attack as well, and then this pushed back the discussions completely. So there's no way right now that Saudi Arabia can do it. We're going to have to wait for things to calm down. Hopefully all this mess there between Gaza and Israel ends very soon. And you might see those conversations pick up again. But the way this administration did it, it was a complete failure. So not right now. I think Monica in front of you.
Omar, do you see the UAE being intimately involved in the rebuilding of Gaza and possibly being part of a coalition in ruling Gaza in the future in a post-Hamas world?
Sure. I don't know if you saw Todd's questions, because all these questions are in his cards.
I wrote that one.
So when the UAE was asked, and actually, by the way, even the Israeli government made the statement and said that the UAE should come and help to try to administer the like Gaza, and we said no, and we made a public statement. The government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said we want to have no interest in doing so. The people of Gaza have to select or elect the right leadership to make that decision for themselves. However, like I said earlier, we always have, for years, provided aid to the people. Previously, we might have done it the wrong way, and the money was going to the wrong people. But I don't know if you saw this recently. There was an article on Axios, and where the UAE foreign minister left the room because there was a screaming thing between him and the Palestinian Authority, which is in the West Bank, saying that he called them Alibaba and the 40 thieves. Because no matter how much money both Palestinian factions get, whether it's a PA or Hamas, you never actually see it going down to the people. So I think the lack of transparency, the corruption level that exists there is too bad. And for us, we sort of don't want to be part of that discussion until we can see a viable leadership that comes out of that area.
Well, I think with all due respect, I think there's a general feeling, and I'll speak for myself, I think a lot of people believe this, that there's all this wealth amongst all these other Arab nations. UAE and Saudi Arabia and Iraq and all these oil rich in Kuwait and Kuwait and Qatar. Gaza and the West Bank is teeny, right? It's teeny, with a rounding error, literally a rounding error in your wealth. You could rebuild it and turn it into Dubai. Okay, right? So why wouldn't those Arab nations get together and say, listen, we need to help put in place or help nurture in some way, in a very productive way, so that this post-war there can be prosperity. You can build Gaza, the West Bank, into a true statehood.
Yes.
But they need to kind of prime the pump. They need to have that leadership. So what's preventing that from happening?
So in the previous administration, there was a proposal that was being worked on for maybe about 2 years. Then a meeting took place in Manama, in Bahrain, Manama is the capital of Bahrain. And this was a proposal for a two-state solution that was supported by everyone, including Israel. They were all there. You can find this online. But the Palestinian Authority rejected it. And in this proposal, there was a commitment from all these Arab countries. I think the total was going to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, almost. And there was a contribution from each country to say, this is what we're going to do if you agree to it, and this is how we're going to help you build a state, and finally, you're going to have a two-state solution. But what happened, and we've seen this time and again, and I'm not a Palestinian, so I don't know whether it was a good deal or a bad deal. But all I know is that every time there was a proposal in the different administration over the years, it keeps getting rejected, and then sadly you're going to see the Palestinian territory is decreasing more and more and more. So this is what you see all the time when you look at the map. So there was a last proposal, and now I feel again, because of this war, you're probably going to see more of the Gaza Strip maybe taken away from them. I hope not, but then it's probably going to happen, and because of their security reasons as well. And unfortunately, it was inevitable.
There's a question back there.
Hi, Omar. Thanks so much for coming to Detroit. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So I had a question. I wanted to touch on something you had mentioned earlier. When we think about exports from the Middle East, we think about oil. However, the UAE is actually leading, as you know, because I looked you up on LinkedIn before I came here, in terms of smart building, sustainability, decarbonization. I'm curious what's driving that.
Yeah, so it's a great point, it's a great question. The UAE's focused recently a lot on the development of artificial intelligence, as well as diversifying its energy needs from other sources, including nuclear, wind, and hydro. In fact, we opened our nuclear power plant about 8 years ago, and now 25% of the UAE's energy needs comes from nuclear. We just started wind energy just last year, and so this comes from the energy perspective and sustainability. Now, when it comes to diversifying our economy, we want to become a leader in the Middle East when it comes to AI. So recently, you might have seen that even Microsoft saw the potential in a company that started in the UAE called G42, and they invested $1.5 billion. We're also invested heavily into NVIDIA, which now is whoever bought stocks in NVIDIA, I can see a lot of smiley faces here. They look like they did.
Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah, I wish I did. So we're investing into chip making too. The other area that's become significant is we become the hub for data centers too. So a lot of companies, and we're talking to Amazon built 4 data centers in the UAE. The government is speaking to other companies, including Google and others, to become the hub of that space too. The other thing that you see as well, that how we've diversified the economy is with financial services. I just showed an article to Todd this morning. The Carlyle Group is looking at setting up an office there. Ray Dalio just opened and moved most of his fund to Abu Dhabi. BlackRock Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these guys are based in the UAE now. So they've managed to really attract all these businesses as a result of policies that are attractive to these people and the incentives that we provide to them. One last thing I want to say about this is by 2071, which will be the year that we celebrate 100 years of the UAE, we've announced something called the Centennial Plan. In this plan, we want to attract manufacturing companies. And as a result of that, we have one of the cheapest rates of power for manufacturing companies in the UAE.
So I just want to put a pin in that because you and I have talked about this. The difference, one of the many differences, is that because of the structure of your government and what you want to call it, it's not a monarchy, but it's I call them board of directors, right? Yeah. And they control it. They can have 50-year plans. Yeah. Right? They can have a conversation today and talk about 2071. Where in America, if we can't get past the next quarter, right? We measure success quarterly. What's going to happen in Wall Street quarterly, or the next election. You think about in our Senate and our, is every 2 years. So there's just a short-term thinking, which is just a totally different mentality. You can do things when you're thinking long-term.
True.
Which is a conversation that I've always had, that long-term thinking will benefit, but in America we struggle with that. Yeah. So, all right, questions. We got one there. We got one down here and then one back there.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you? Can you comment on, and I'm sure you're familiar with, Saudi Arabia is making a huge push for companies, right? All of the companies you mentioned say we want your regional hub and your headquarters in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, with C-suites in there, obviously trying to pull away and compete with the UAE. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I love that question, sir. I'm glad you asked. So obviously, I mean, there is, I like to say, healthy competition between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I have to say that here. But the truth is, yes, if you come to the UAE, you'll see all the major brands exist there. Microsoft, Google, IBM, Oracle, everybody, all of these companies for the longest time have had their regional headquarters in the UAE. So when I say regional, it means because they have a huge presence in the UAE, they manage the operations in the Middle East and North Africa, Asia, Pakistan, Turkey, all these places are usually led within the UAE. When Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, came to power, he's like, okay, you know what? We're done with working with these companies that continuously just fly into Saudi and go back. But of course, a lot of these companies didn't want to be in Saudi because it was very closed. They had very strict restrictions. Women couldn't drive, etc. But he came in and changed everything. Now, obviously, women can drive. They can wear what they want. You see music festivals taking place in Saudi. It's completely transformed. So they feel that they've made Saudi Arabia a place where you can live, work, and play. As a result, they announced the RHQ, which is the regional headquarters strategy, telling these companies, if you want to get contracts in Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, the size of the contract there is enormous. Like, if we would pay a company $1 million in the UAE to do a project, in Saudi Arabia, they'll pay you $10 million. So, like, how do you say no to that? And so now what we were able to do is the UAE said, you know what? There's nothing wrong with having two regional headquarters. So a lot of these companies, they still don't want to leave the UAE because still the quality of life is way different from what it is in Saudi Arabia. Whether people see it's better or worse, it's up to them to decide. So for example, Amazon is going to be setting up in Saudi Arabia, and they will have a CEO of Amazon Saudi Arabia. And there is a CEO of Amazon in the UAE and other parts of the world. So they are giving them the C-suite titles in Saudi, and they are opening an office there. But the size of the contracts that they were able to get in Saudi helps them to even justify having another regional headquarters too. So it's everybody in this case wins.
Good. There's a question up here. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark. I'll just repeat it. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have limited experience or understanding of
the region.
But I know there's this issue with Saudi Arabia, which I believe is Prime Minister
Yeah, Shia. Yeah.
Can you give us like, I guess as someone who supports Israel, I've always had this maybe slanted perspective that Saudis more on earth. What is, like, how bad is this Saudi-Iran situation? Is it really as ugly as we hear? Give us your perspective on that.
So the question was kind of the Shiite-Sunni relationship and Iran and Israel and how that's all connected based upon your different Arabic or Muslim.
So, okay, I have to give a little bit of context.
Sure,
I need to
go
go
ahead.
back a little bit more. Todd told me don't. Okay, anyways. But I want everybody to understand. Okay, everybody knows, I'm not sure if all of you know, but Iran at some point in time, back in the late 70s, had a revolution. The Islamic Revolution, etc. The Khomeini, who by the way, was broadcasting the revolution and what he wanted to do to Iran when they used to have a Shah or the king from France. So a lot of Western countries have a lot of things to play, whether they propped him up or not. It's up to you to look it up and decide. Anyways, and that's mostly because the king of Iran at that time was nationalizing oil fields and oil companies weren't happy. And suddenly there was a revolution, which, anyways, you think about it. So then what happened when the Khomeini or the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran, one thing that you notice is that Iran was trying to export this revolution into other places too. They wanted to start with Iraq. That's why you saw there was a huge war between Iraq and Iran for 8 years. It was a bloody war between these two countries. And then they were trying to do the same, moving into Saudi Arabia and these other countries in the Gulf as well. But fortunately, because the UAE was also, it used to be I think a protectorate of the British government, and then we gained our independence in 1971. So the British kind of protected our territories from the Iranian Revolution. However, as you can probably see, Iran till today fund a lot of these organizations that I talked to you about earlier. So there's Syria is one of the proxies you can say for Iran in a lot of areas, Hezbollah. Then you have the Houthis in Yemen and other areas. So because of this, there was a lot of tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And you probably saw the huge war that took place between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. Where were the Houthis getting all this training and funding from and the weapons from? They were getting all of this from Iran. Of course now, they've normalized, I guess, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There are some tensions, but you don't see like the attacks from the Houthis to Saudi Arabia like what used to exist a few years ago. Where do we stand? I think Iran, I think for Iran, what they really want Saudi Arabia to play a role in is to try to convince the Americans to lift the sanctions from them. Most of the things that go into Iran come in from China or from other areas. So as long as Saudi Arabia can kind of play like an advocate for Iranian needs, I think those tensions will continue to simmer down between the two countries.
But are they enemies? Do they hate each other? Is there this cultural difference between the Sunnis and the Shias?
So Mark is asking, are they enemies, Sunni Shia? Look, the propaganda used by the leaders in these countries, they try to use religion as a thing. But between the people, I mean, even in the UAE, we have Emirati Shias. I have Shia friends. So the leaders try to use that and say, oh, the Sunnis, they are the ones who did this and this to our leader in the Shia faith, and so it's played by the for propaganda purposes. But other than that, it doesn't really exist between the peoples.
There's a couple of people back there.
Omar,
Yes, sir.
how has the UAE suppressed radical Islam?
Oh, wow. Okay, how has the UAE suppressed radical Islam?
Let me go. Okay. So this afternoon, or this morning, I should say, that Hannah and Omar and Karen and I toured the Holocaust Center in West Bloomfield. So with Ellie Merrifield and so on and so forth. And so a lot of conversation there about, you know, that what's going on, both on what your question as it relates to the Holocaust. I just wanted to kind of set that stage so people know what's going on today.
Cool. So we've suppressed this through identifying the culprits. And as I said earlier, one of the most powerful entities in the world is something called the Muslim Brotherhood. It started a long time ago, back in the 1920s, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And they have their different proxies around the world. In the UAE, they actually funded an entity. It was a charitable organization called Al-Islah. And when their message of what they really were about was, uncovered by the government's intelligence services, they were all imprisoned. And one of the ways that we do this is, so for example, I was telling Todd and everybody else, one of the ways that these people try to get their message across is either through education in the school systems, in the textbooks, because a lot of them are very well educated. They have PhDs from some of the top schools in the world, and they were able to get jobs where they influenced the curriculum, but also they were able to influence and affect the imams in the mosques. So the imams were, preaching things, etc. Now in the UAE, the way that we manage this, including the rest of the Gulf, the imams don't have the liberty to just go and talk about whatever they want to. So most of the time, for Muslims, we go to the mosque on Friday to listen to what's called the khutbah or the sermon, just like, you go to Sunday for Christians in Mass and everything else. And every imam in the UAE is given a script, and they need to read off the script and not get off of it at all. So they see them, they're standing there and they're reading it, and and this is it. What do they talk about? It's always about you can say something around the 10 Commandments, about being a good citizen or being a good person, and the values of civilization, etc. So that's how we control. Some people say, oh, but isn't that like a violation of free speech? I'm like, look, as long as the speech is positive and decent and safe and secure for everyone, then it's not a violation, it's a freedom for everybody that's living in the country. That's how we manage and control that kind of radicalism.
We've got a few more questions because this can go on all day long. So I think some other people over here. We got one over there, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This has been a fascinating conversation and window on a part of the world that many of us don't really know a lot about directly. If we can return to Saudi Arabia and Iran for a moment, the deal that was brokered between Saudi Arabia and Iran was done by China. I think we in the U.S. have tended to think of ourselves as the major diplomatic force in the region. Can you talk a little bit about China's role in the Middle East?
So that's a great question. I think, I have to be careful because I also have a U.S. diplomat in the room sitting in the front, so I have to be careful I don't step on anybody's shoes. He's also was on the board of the Fulbright, so it was an honor to meet him. Where the U.S. sort of messed up for the region started during, unfortunately, the Obama administration. So when the Muslim Brotherhood took over or led the Arab Spring in the countries, and when Egypt had Mohammed Morsi as their president, who's from the Muslim Brotherhood, and very quickly we saw Hillary Clinton went to visit him and pledged support to his government. That was where it immediately shifted. We thought we had our alliance and trust with the US government. Everything went to the ground. And we said, you know what? I think we need to find a different partner that will help us when it comes to political situations, technological situations, all of these different things. And quickly China saw their opportunity after being very successful from the economic perspective, that now they can play this soft power diplomacy and have a hand in the issues of the region. So China started to come in the picture from that time during the Obama administration. Now obviously fast forward with all these different problems that have been taking place, we felt that with the previous, and by the way, we didn't want the Obama administration to do that Iran deal. That was a huge mess up because they did that without consultation from the Gulf countries and Israel. So when we saw that this was all taking place without our consultation, we thought it would be better to work with somebody else. And it wasn't only getting China to sort out the issues between Iran and Saudi Arabia from a political perspective, but also supporting them in their Belt and Road Initiative as well. So that's how, and China continues to be a very powerful player. In fact, I'll tell you this, in our public schools now, they're teaching Mandarin. That's how powerful they became. So, oh, by the way, they also teach Hebrew in our public schools. So,
One last question, then I get the last one after that. Anybody got anything? Christos. Whoa, you got Michael.
Thank you. Omar, Todd, thank you for being here. Question, the sovereign wealth funds, IDA, and there's been a lot of money that's been spent, a lot of sports lately, especially in the Middle East, buying and entertainment. But what is the bet that the Middle Eastern countries are looking at towards real estate and towards investing in the U.S.? Because obviously it's always been about the coasts, but maybe just an overall thought about sovereign wealth funds and their investments in the U.S.
Sure. So sovereign wealth funds, the UAE is, I think, the second or the third largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. The sovereign wealth fund was created as a result of the funds that came from the oil industry. They used a lot of those revenues to put into this fund, and it's one of the richest in the world. So ADIA, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, is right there on the top. They have actually an office in New York, and they look at investing into a lot of real estate here. I mentioned to Todd that ADIA actually invested in all the parking lots in Chicago. They own the Chrysler Building in New York. They own Columbus Circle in New York, and a lot of other projects.
They could invest in Detroit too.
They could, yeah. So this is, yeah. They could invest in Detroit too. I mean, the appetite for UAE sovereign wealth funds, including other Gulf funds, to invest in the U.S. is a big. It's a really big appetite, and they want to come here. I think it's the leadership in Detroit. The onus is on them on how they present that package to them, and these guys are ready to dig deep in their pockets and support your projects here.
So a perfect segue, because I'm going to close this on a very selfish line here, okay? Which I prepped you for this. I'm sure you're totally prepared for this. You've been in Detroit now for 2 days, okay? If you could give 3 pieces of advice to the leadership of Detroit, hope some of you are still here. How can we grow the population, attract business, encourage development that you have learned and what you've seen in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and when your travels the world? What would be the advice that you would give to us, the leaders of Detroit, both from a government standpoint and the business leaders of Detroit? What would you suggest?
Okay. So number one, I would say invest in the right leadership. I would like to say like youth leadership too. One thing I noticed when I come to the States, and I don't mean any offense. By the way, I'm 38 years old. I don't fall in the youth category anymore. You're in youth when you're like 35. Anything over 35, you're apparently old. I'm telling you, I can't apply for any programs now from the State Department. They said you're too old. So I'm not old, I'm not young anymore, so I can say this. But youth leadership is essential. So if the government here in Detroit can identify or put the youth into really strong leadership programs and invest in them, they will be the ones to carry the city forward, number one. Number two, as I said earlier, invest in security and infrastructure. I mean, I drove around. Yes, I liked some of the buildings, but some of the roads, it's a bit questionable. I mean, I heard that there's some pipes that are still made out of wood. So
Yeah.
Todd told me this. So I mean, you telling if you want the investors to come and you're telling them that you've got outdated infrastructure from God knows when, it's not going to be good. So reach out to your representatives and tell them to send some money here from DC. And then number 3, I would say, and I know I said this as a joke, but the UAE did so much PR in, oh, you know, this is the best place to live and whatever, when we still weren't. But they made a lot of noise because, you know, if you say something so much, you're going to believe it and you're going to make other people believe it. At least believe in the vision. So most of what they were promoting in so many events and roadshows and exhibitions were literally off-plan projects. So they were showing you off-plan cities. This is what the city will look like. This is what it's going to be like. And they didn't even put, it's not that they didn't have the funding, but they didn't put the funding to invest in this. Everything that you see in the UAE, over 80% of the development is private money. And the money came from all over the world. But how did they do that? To facilitate all this is what the leadership needs to do here in Detroit, offer the right incentives. So look at your policies and regulations and make sure that this will be, like, what will defer you from Chicago or from New York or from Miami, etc., all these major cities. So this is what we were able to do because the UAE saw, oh, all these companies are going to Singapore and Hong Kong. So we modeled our success to Singapore and Hong Kong. Why? Because both these places don't have natural resources, but they became so successful with trade and tourism and all these other fields. So we said, the way for us to be successful is we have to convert our country into a knowledge-based economy. And that's what the UAE has done, and that's why I'm happy that question came up about how we diversifying into other economies, including sustainability, AI, and etc. So if you position Detroit as a knowledge-based economy, trust me, you're going to be able to attract people to live, work, and play.
And remind everybody here how long it takes to get a business permit in Dubai.
No, 24 hours.
Okay? I just want to make sure that everybody in Detroit hears that, right? Because that is also a giant obstacle.
Yeah.
A lot of what I've learned in talking to Omar and what is that they make it easy to do business in their cities, in their country.
Yeah.
So if there's a message I'd like to put out there to all the people in this room, whether you're business leaders, your community people, what do we have to do in Michigan and in Detroit particularly to make it easy to do business? Because business brings opportunity, it brings jobs, it brings, you know, all the things that we want, security, money to do all those things. We have to make it easier to attract you to business here. With that, thank you so much, Omar. Thank all of you for coming, right? We have plenty of bars open, cocktails, food. Thank you all for participating. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it.